Okay, so are you ready? Today we are going deep, deep into the sometimes strange and often surprising world of AP microeconomics.
Yeah, we'll be taking a look at the core curriculum for the course, and
Don't worry, we're not going to make this some boring econ lecture, right? We're going to dig up all the cool stuff, all the interesting insights that'll make you want to ace that exam.
or just understand how the world really works. Like, why are some things so expensive?
Right, like why is my avocado toast suddenly like $12?
Well, we might just uncover the answer to that, but first we gotta lay the foundation, right? Unit 1, it's all about scarcity, choice, and opportunity cost.
Okay, so scarcity, right? It's like think about those limited edition sneakers that everyone's going crazy for.
Or like concert tickets, everyone wants to go to that big show, there've only so many seats.
Exactly. So you can't have everything you want. There are limited resources that forces you to make choices. And those choices, well, they have consequences.
That's where opportunity cost comes in. Like, what did you have to give up to get those sneakers or that concert ticket? Maybe you had to skip a few dinners out or...
Or maybe you couldn't buy that new video game you were eyeing. It's that trade-off, the thing you have to give up to get something else. And it's not always just about the money, right?
No, not at all. It's about any resource. Could be time, could be energy. It's like, do I study for this econ test or do I binge watch that new show everyone's talking about?
Ooh, tough choice. But governments face these kinds of decisions on a massive scale, right?
Right, all the time. Should we invest in infrastructure or should we boost education spending? Resources are always limited, even for governments, so they got to prioritize.
And that's where that, was it the PPC comes in?
The production possibilities curve. Yeah, it's a visual way to represent all those potential trade-offs, showing all the different combinations of goods and services that an economy could produce.
All right, so we've got scarcity, we've got choices, we've got opportunity costs. Now let's talk about the real drivers of the economy. I'm talking about supply and demand, baby.
Ah, yes, the dynamic duo of economics, they're always at play, even if we don't realize it.
Okay, so you know how sometimes you go to the grocery store and you're like, wait, why are eggs suddenly so expensive?
Well, that's supply and demand in action. Could be a number of things. Higher feed costs for chickens, maybe. Less supply. Or maybe everyone's suddenly making more omelets, so demand is up.
So basically, if more people want something, the price goes up. But if there's a lot of something, the price goes down.
Precisely. It's a constant dance between those two forces. Remember those laws of supply and demand. As the price of something goes up, the quantity demanded generally goes down, but the quantity supplied usually goes up.
And there's that, what do they call it, the sweet spot where supply and demand meet.
Equilibrium, that's where the quantity buyers are willing to buy, matches the quantity sellers are willing to sell, and the price is stable, at least for a while.
Makes you wonder, like, how many times a day do those curves shift without us even knowing, right? But let's go a little deeper here. Unit 2 takes us into the realm of elasticity. So it's not just about supply and demand changing, it's about how much they react to changes in price, right?
Exactly. Some things are really sensitive to price changes, others not so much. Think about gasoline. People need it to get to work, to school, so even if the price jumps, demand might not drop that much.
That's what they call inelastic demand, right?
Right, inelastic demand. But think about something like a luxury watch. If the price goes way up, people might say, you know what, I'll wait.
Yeah, they'll stick with their old watch a bit longer or maybe buy a different brand.
That's elastic demand. And this whole idea of elasticity, it's super important for businesses. Like, let's say you own a company that makes fancy coffee.
My kind of company.
Right. Now, if you know that demand for your coffee is pretty inelastic, people are willing to pay a premium for it, well, you might have some room to raise prices.
You can get away with charging a little more without scaring too many customers away. But if it's elastic, well, you got to be more careful.
Absolutely. And government's got to think about this too, especially when it comes to taxes.
You were talking about tax incidents earlier, right? How taxes don't always fall where you think they will.
Yeah, tax incidence is all about who really ends up paying the tax. It might be the consumer, or it might be the producer, or maybe a bit of both. Like, let's say the government decides to put a tax on sugary sodas to, encourage healthier choices.
So you'd think that soda companies would just eat that cost, right?
Not necessarily. They could raise the price of soda to cover the tax, passing some of that burden on to the consumer.
So it's a game of hot potato with a tax burden. Interesting. And then there's the concept of dead weight loss.
Ah, yes, dead weight loss. This happens when a market isn't operating efficiently, maybe because of taxes or subsidies or price controls. Basically, some potential benefits are just lost.
So everyone kind of loses out a bit, right? Okay, now let's shift gears and step inside a business. Unit 3 is all about production and costs.
So you know how businesses are obsessed with profit, right? Well, there are actually two ways to look at profit.
You got accounting profit, and then there's economic profit, right?
You got it. Accountants, they focus on the explicit costs, the direct out-of-pocket expenses. But economists, we also factor in implicit costs.
Implicit costs. Sounds kind of mysterious.
It's all about opportunity cost again. It's the cost of using your resources in one way instead of another. Like, Let's say you decide to quit your job to start your own food truck business.
Always wanted to do that.
Right, so you're putting in your time, your energy, your savings. Your accounting profit might be low at first, after you pay for all the supplies and stuff.
But you're also gaining the freedom of being your own boss, chasing your dream, and that has value too.
Exactly, and that's an implicit cost that accounts don't always capture.
Okay, so implicit costs are like the hidden costs of doing business.
You could say that. And speaking of costs, you ever heard of the law of diminishing marginal returns?
Something about too many cooks in the kitchen.
Haha, kinda. Basically, it says that as you add more of a variable input, like labor, to a fixed input, like your kitchen space, the additional output you get from each extra worker eventually starts to decline.
Okay, so like if you have one pizza chef, they can crank out a lot of pizzas. Add another chef, you get even more pizzas.
But keep adding chefs, and eventually you're going to have too many people in the kitchen getting in each other's way, right?
Right, they'll be bumping into each other, fighting over the pizza cutters. Makes sense. Okay, so now let's talk about different types of markets. You mentioned this idea of perfect competition,
Yeah, perfect competition. It's like a textbook example of how markets work.
but it doesn't really exist in the real world, does it?
Not quite, but it's a good starting point. So imagine a market where there are tons of sellers, all selling the same exact product. No one seller can influence the price. They're what we call price takers.
So like if you're a farmer selling corn, and there are 1,000 other farmers selling the same corn, you can't just decide to charge more for your corn, right?
Right. If you try to charge more, people will just buy from someone else. You're at the mercy of the market. But most markets aren't like that. Unit 4 takes us into the world of imperfect competition.
Okay, so imperfect competition. This is where things get a little more real world, right?
Exactly. The first type of imperfect competition is a monopoly. This is where there's only one seller in the market. They have complete control over the price.
So like if you're the only gas station in a small town, you can charge whatever you want, right?
Well, within reason, but you get the idea. Monopolies can be bad for consumers because they can lead to higher prices and less choice.
And historically, we've seen monopolies try to crush their competition, right?
Right. That's why we have antitrust laws to try to break up monopolies and promote competition. Then there are oligopolies.
Oligopolies, what are those?
It's when a few big firms dominate a market, like the airline industry or the cell phone market. These companies, they're constantly watching each other, trying to outmaneuver their rivals.
So it's like a game of chess, but with billions of dollars at stake.
Exactly. And they can sometimes collude to keep prices high, which is bad for consumers.
They're not exactly playing fair, huh? And then there's something called monopolistic competition.
Right. Monopolistic competition. This is where there are many sellers, but they sell slightly differentiated products. Think about restaurants, coffee shops, clothing stores.
So like even though there are a million places to get a burger, they all try to make their burger a little bit different, a little bit special.
Exactly. They're competing on more than just price. They're competing on quality, style, branding, you name it. So each market structure has its own quirks, and they all impact how businesses behave and what consumers get.
Okay, so we've talked about goods and services, different types of markets. But what about the market for labor? That's Unit 5, right?
Yep, the labor market. Same principles of supply and demand, just applied to jobs and wages. Think of your skills and experience as a product. You're selling it to employers.
So like if you're a software engineer with hot skills, you're in high demand, right?
You got it. And that means you can command a higher salary. It's all about your marginal product of labor, how much extra output a company gets from hiring you.
So the more valuable your skills are, the more you can earn. Makes sense. But what about situations where there's only one major employer in an area, like a big factory in a small town?
That's called a monoxeny. The workers don't have a lot of other options, so the company has more power to set wages.
So it's like a monopoly, but for buying labor instead of selling a product. And that can lead to lower wages, right?
It can, yeah. And sometimes, even with all the market forces we've talked about, things still go wrong.
You mean like when markets fail? That's Unit 6, right?
Yep, market failure. This happens when the free market doesn't lead to the most efficient outcome.
So like the invisible hand drops the ball.
Haha, exactly. One classic example is pollution. A company might be making a lot of money producing something, but they're also polluting the air and water.
Yeah, and that pollution harms everyone, not just the people buying their product,
Right, that's a negative externality. Another example is public goods.
like parks and libraries and stuff.
Exactly. Everyone benefits from those things, but it's hard to get people to pay for them voluntarily. It's like, why should I pay if I can just use them for free?
That's the free rider problem, right? Someone else will pay for it. And what about that, the tragedy of the commons you mentioned earlier? What was that all about?
Oh, that's a classic example of what can happen when resources are shared, but nobody's really in charge. Imagine a pasture that everyone can use to graze their sheep. It's tempting for each person to let their sheep graze as much as possible,
To
right?
get the most out of it.
Right, but if everyone does that, the pasture gets overgrazed and nobody can use it anymore.
So it's like everyone acting in their own self-interest can end up hurting everyone in the long run.
Exactly. It's a tragedy, and that's why governments often step in to try to fix these market failures, whether it's through regulations or taxes or subsidies.
So it's like sometimes the market needs a little help from the government to work properly.
Sometimes, yeah, but government intervention isn't always perfect either. Sometimes it creates more problems than it solves.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of things like government failures, like when a policy has unintended consequences or creates a bunch of red tape.
Yep, it happens. So finding that right balance between free markets and government intervention, it's a challenge. But that's what economics is all about, understanding these complex systems, the trade-offs, the incentives, the unintended consequences.
Wow, we really went deep today. What's the biggest takeaway for you from all of this, this whole AP microeconomics shebang?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is that economics is about more than just money and markets. It's a way of thinking, a way of understanding how people make decisions in a world of scarcity.
And those decisions, they have ripple effects, they impact everyone and everything. It's all connected, right?
Exactly. And one last thing to ponder, we've been talking about how people and businesses generally act rationally, right? But in the real world, people do all sorts of crazy things.
We make impulse purchases, we procrastinate, we eat that extra slice of cake even though we know we shouldn't.
That's where behavioral economics comes in. It looks at how psychology influences our economic decisions, things like emotions, biases, social pressure.
So it's like economics meets psychology.
You got it. It's a fascinating field, and it can help us understand why people sometimes make decisions that seem irrational from a purely economic perspective.
All right, listeners, that's a wrap for our deep dive into AP microeconomics.
We hope this has given you a solid foundation, whether you're studying for that exam.
Or just trying to make sense of the economic world around us.
Because economics is everywhere.
It's in the choices we make every day, the prices we see at the store, the policies our governments create. And the more you understand it, the more empowered you'll be as a consumer, as a citizen, as a human being, making your way in this complex world.
Thanks for listening.